Okay. I know one person said they had to go for an interview or something like that. That's all right, no problem. Okay, are we good to go? So, good news, bad news. Midterm project progress grades coming up. So, can you read that? Basically, we'll be making that assessment on March 13th, which is about a week from now. It's exactly a week from now, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Account for 10% of the 35% of your product grade, so 35% of product grade, 10% of that. And it'll be based on this kind of stuff. Progress on completing the steps on the roadmap, quality of the code so far, degree of challenge of the product plan, what you're actually trying to do, because if you're trying to do something really simple, then that's not going to be that impressive. Thoughtfulness of the stories with respect to this showcase day version. Probability of success, how likely do we think you're going to actually pull it off? Preparation for the product review meeting so far based on their feedback. Informal feedback from the product reviewers just as they talk. TA advisors' assessment of team progress, and individuals' contribution to team success. So those are the things that we're going to look at. All right? And obviously the purpose is to know where the products are at, since really in a way the products are the crux of this course. And success on the products is a combination of technical prowess, being able to actually use the stuff we learned, willingness to challenge yourselves, doing something hard, but not so hard that you will fail, and then operating in a team. Because if you have a team of 4 people and one person is not doing anything, or one person is causing conflict because they don't want to help make decisions, or there are obstacles, all those things sort of hurt the team. And for me, actually, as big a part of what I'm trying to get to happen in this class as anything is for you all to get an experience working on a project that has fairly high stakes and that lasts a whole semester. Because I venture to say, although I'll ask, has anybody had that experience yet at Brandeis to work on a project with 4 people where the stakes are high and it spans the whole semester? Yes? What class was that? Just curious.
No class. I studied with Jacob, I guess. It's
on what?
High stakes, I guess.
What was that? An independent study or?
Yeah, independent study.
With
Jacob, Sharat, and Alex Bertusa.
This is with Tim, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. What product was that?
The location-based messaging thing.
Location-based messaging thing. Like where are you, or whatever?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
What was it called? What was the name of the product?
We call it Gadabout, but.
What again?
Call it Gadabout.
Okay. Anyway, I won't go down that particular rat hole. Okay, good. So, so I just want to let you guys know about that, and so you have basically a whole week, a weekend plus a whole week to do whatever you feel like you need to do well on that. You feel sufficiently informed? Is this reasonable? Anybody have a worry about this or want to ask a question about this? Okay, great, awesome. All right, so I'm going to actually skip talking about the homework due today because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about in the class, and so unless somebody wants to, actually I'll open the floor for any questions about the homework, any issues, any whatever. Anybody want to ask a question or say something about the homework?
The vulnerabilities homework?
Say what?
Today's homework?
Today's homework. Yeah, today's homework, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Do we have to be really specific how we're going to solve the vulnerability problem? If they talk about whitelists?
No, I think all I'm looking for is mapping what you read in that article to your products, and saying, here's some things that we have to watch out for, and here's how we're going to watch out for it. I don't mean to have to apply every single technique in there. Yeah?
Is it suggested that we either do like the whitelisting and the whole sessions thing and enforcing the like secure connection thing as opposed to Brakeman, or also implementing Brakeman?
I think really I threw those out as options. I didn't mean it to be prescriptive.
Okay.
I think if you want to use Brakeman, I haven't looked at it recently. I know when it came out it was weak but interesting. It's probably gotten stronger. So you want to look at it and evaluate it to see whether you think it's good. And I mean, it's really up to you. I'd like to know, given all this information, here are some specific areas with our product that we think we have to pay attention to. Okay? So I mean, I'm trying to have you operate like engineers who are presented with some technologies and tools and have to evaluate how much time to invest in them, given the objectives of your project. Okay? And I also, by doing that, want to know that you guys read and understood it. That's a hard chapter. It's a hard article, so I'm not expecting you to understand everything. But those are all real-world things, and so to the extent you get exposure to them, that's really good. Okay. So let's jump to some Rails-specific stuff before we jump back out into more general stuff. So why is this thing not getting bigger? Oh, that's better. So we talked a little bit about resources last time, or at least in the last few times, but I don't think that we really nailed it down sufficiently well. So I wanted to just review it again. And I'm going to not do coding. I'm going to be writing on the board and asking questions. But basically what we're talking about is in your routes, what directory is routes.rb, can routes.rb be found? Anybody?
Config.
Yes.
The config.
Config directory, yes. And what, in a sentence or two, does routes.rb control? What is its purpose in life? Yes?
How your URLs interact with each other, which pages to which.
Perfect, exactly. Okay? So as you know, you can put in the very simplistic ones, you can put a get route, which just says if a get is issued to, pedo hello, then go to this particular controller and this action. That's the most elementary one. Now, the resources one is a powerful one. So when you do resource people, I think that's the column, yeah. What it's saying a lot of things. Okay, this is one of the places where Rails has very powerful primitives with a little bit of text does a lot. Okay, so this does a bunch of different things. The first thing it does is it generates not one route but a whole series of routes. I think like 8 or 9 of them. Right? Who can tell me more about that? What are those routes about? Why would one line generate 8 or 9, whereas the previous line generated only 1? While you think, maybe I will do a little bit of coding really fast, so we can illustrate it. And by the way, this is also an illustration of the fact that it's very safe and a good idea, if you're not sure about something, to quickly create a side Rails project. Okay, a Rails app. Instead of, because I was talking to somebody who was wondering about something or other, how it would work, and they were modifying their product code to experiment. And the difficulty with that is that your product code's got a lot of other stuff in it. You might have introduced a bug somewhere, or something might behave weirdly and you won't know why. Much better to just grab a new directory, say Rails new, delete, let me just say routes and resources. Now, row re, okay? And it's doing its thing, cd to row re, subl to edit it. And I'm going to go right into, I'm going to just do one thing just to show you in a way how separate. So in the config directory, like we discussed, there's the routes file. And this is all comments. All this green stuff is comment. So I can do resources, books. One line to experiment with this. So I gave you guys a lot of time to think. Why does this one line generate 8 or 9 routes? Yes. All right.
Because it makes the people .new or .show and
Right.
all that stuff.
And we call those the CRUD operations, for create, read, update, and delete. Okay? So how do I find out what routes it created? What's the easy way to debug this, to open up the hood and see?
We can just type rake routes.
Yes, we can type rake routes, which I will now do. Except not there. Rake routes. And a couple of things that are interesting about this before I even read the output. Notice it didn't look if I had a model, it didn't look if I had a controller. This just illustrates how the routes are their own little world, okay? All I did was put one line into a blank Rails app, just to experiment with this. So remember, you can do this experimentation as well. So let's look at this. So rake routes lists all the routes it knows. And with each route, it's going to indicate the verb, that HTTP verb, get, post, get, patch, put, delete, and the URL that goes with it. Okay? And then over here, you see the controller and the action. You read this as being books controller, which is a class in your controller directory, and within that class you'll find def index. So that when you just type get books / by itself, it's going to get essentially a list of all the books. If you say post books, it's going to basically, it usually goes with first you do, okay, if you do post books, it's expecting that somebody just click the submit on a form, and we're going to learn much more about forms in a day or two, and it's going to update the books. So these are all the controller actions. Over here we see the prefixes of the automatically generated methods for navigation. So this says that there is a method that appears out of thin air called books_path, and that method returns a text string corresponding to this. So it would return /books. More interesting is this method, which is book path, okay? Because this takes one parameter, and the one parameter is an instance of the book class. Okay, this is a little bit confusing maybe, but you'll see it in the code. You might have seen it in the code, not sure what was going on. So basically this is going to be a method that looks like this. Book path, one parameter, let's say book. You'll see this in a view in the template, in the ERB file. @book will have been set to be an instance of a book, and this thing will return the text string /book /4. Let's say 4, if book happens to be the 4th book. So it just returns a text string. All of these methods just return text strings, and those text strings correspond to paths. And they're just, we call them helpers because they make it easier to write views. Okay? Good. And I won't go through all of them, but the similar story applies to all of them. Yes?
When you say resources books, how does Rails decide whether to assign get or post to each one?
Okay. It's basically a convention that, and they have decided, the Rails builders decided that everything that you're willing to call a resource, and that's not everything because we'll get into a little bit more about that just in a few minutes, has by definition this collection of operations with this collection of HTTP calls. So they call this the REST, R-E-S-T, format for URLs. REST, I'm sure some of you have heard the term, but maybe don't know exactly what it is. And I'm going to talk a lot about it in about 5 minutes. But it's a convention for how to design URLs. Okay? Was there another question? I thought maybe. Okay. So now I want to pick it up a notch, as they say. I'm going to say now, I'm going to create a nested resource. Okay? And let's just do rake routes, and then we'll talk about what it did. Sorry?
You have to close the loop.
Close the?
Loop?
It's not a loop, but you're right, I have to close it. Close the block would be the right jargon. This is a lot more interesting. Let me just kill it so we can see the page by itself. Now let's study this. Who can tell me, who can try to give a little narrative about, for example, the get that is connected with book chapter. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th. The 5th one. Who can give me a narrative of what they think that's telling us? This is new. I haven't talked about this before, but I think you want to look at it and think about what you know about using websites. Anybody? Yes, go ahead.
So I'm going to assume it's the same as with the book path, except after you do the book and the ID for that, you put in the chapter and the chapter.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the underlying database structure or the underlying information design is books that contain chapters. And for any book, like book number 4, I could ask for chapter number 9. And presumably it would return, this is like a Kindle, it would return that page on the screen. And if I wanted the next chapter, I would go /book/3/chapter number 5. Okay, that's exactly right. And you'll see that by virtue of having created this nested resource, I now have, again, my collection of CRUD operations, however, generalized a lot. Because I can say get book ID chapter, okay, which would be get me, an index usually means give me a list. So this is a list of the chapters of book 3, of book N. The next one, post book ID chapter, is what you would use to create a new chapter in that book. The next one is the one, let's go to get book by itself, which is sort of a leftover from before. That gives me some summary for book 3, all its chapters, for example. It might show you a list of all the chapters. And so here we have not 7, but whatever, more than 7 automatically created routes. Yes?
When you're typing in the URL, would you see the individual book ID or chapter ID in the URL?
Under the if you said, in other words, if you said /book/5/chapter/7, yeah, that's what you would see.
Okay.
Those are literally part of the URL.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
Well, this makes sense technically this way to have one chapter under a book. Well, in our project, we have something sort of similar. You know, each user, each client will have a certain amount of triggers.
Right.
But we want an admin, for example, to be able to pull up all triggers regardless of who the user is. So does it make sense to do like resources? You know, users do under that resources triggers and after that for an admin do resources triggers.
Absolutely. Let's do it and see what happens. And again, I want you to sort of just like see and enjoy and totally get warm fuzzies from how you can do these experiments just on an empty Rails app and how much cleaner it is because you're not messing with all this code. So feel free to, anything you want to try that's not working, whether it's a route or a schema or a belongs to or a JavaScript or whatever, always give yourself a clean deck to work on. Yes?
Why is that resources books and the other one resources chapter?
Let me just...
is there a reason one's plural?
Oh, there always is a reason. Because it's code, so there's got to be a reason. Okay, so show me exactly which one you're talking about.
I mean, I'm looking in the routes that are being...
One's chapter. Oh, that's just my typoness. There's no reason. And by the way, in the design of the URL, there's also no strong argument. Should I say /books/3 or /book/3? That becomes a judgment call. And you can use whatever makes the most sense to you intuitively. But let's look at this interesting thing. So I can actually get chapter here, all the chapters. So if I did this, it would get me all the chapters no matter what book they're from. And if I did this, I could create a new chapter independent of a book. So here I got exactly the things that you wanted. Okay? Now realize that you're going to want to, and we're going to talk about authentication hopefully today, make sure that only the admin can get these things. Because for anybody else it makes no sense. Okay? Okay. So that's what we're talking about here. You can nest the models with URLs, CRUD operations as actions, path naming, path to user instead of quotes. So you can actually type a method and instead of remembering that it's HTTP / blah 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 and putting the numbers in. And it helps you with making sure that the controls are named correctly. So it's a huge time saver, a huge bug saver. But don't feel like you're totally tied to it, like the example we just did. You can actually have another route if that's what you want. But it starts with the design of your URL. What are the URLs you want? Okay? So now talk about controller actions real quick. So who calls a controller action? Anybody? What subsystem? How does a controller action get called? Anybody? What causes a controller action to be called? You all know this. So trust yourself and give the answer that's on the tip of your tongue. Okay? Discuss with your neighbor, please, and achieve wholeness of spirit. What causes a controller action to be called?
I don't know if I'm right about this, but
The people that aren't talking, I assume they know the answer. Yeah, enough time to type into Google what causes a controller action to be called. All right, who's got the answer? You guys didn't talk, so you must know it. What causes a controller action to be called?
So you type in the root, and then the root goes to the config folder, checks it which root is assigned to which controller, and then through that you pick the action that it's assigned to.
Yep.
And execute that action in the controller.
Yep, right. So everybody's nodding as if they knew it, but nobody wanted to talk. Say what? Okay, that's that. So what is the answer? Tell me, the easy answer.
The easy answer is that the route is a big file. It makes an association between the URL and the controller.
And what about the action? That's what we're calling the action.
I mean, yeah, it makes an association with the action.
Right. So the answer I had in mind was, it's the routing subsystem that calls the action upon receiving a URL. It parses it and finds the right action to call. And if you don't have such a controller action, you get an error message. You probably have seen, just like no controller for this action. I know it's a question I've asked 100 times before, but I want to make sure everybody has it clear in their mind. What parameters are supplied automatically by the controller action? What is in the params hash? Anybody? What is in the params hash? You know it's a hash, right? Because you know it's a hash because we access it like this. We say params bracket ID, for example. And that becomes 1, for example. So what's in the params hash? There was a hand. Yes?
It accepts params by given routes.
Yep.
To prevent any sort of weird jokery that might come with SQL if you allow any sort of any unrestricted parameters.
So if my route said book booknum, then finish the sentence.
Then it only accepts booknums and not some arbitrary string, which could be like a SQL injection.
And how does it relate to the params hash?
The params hash defines what can go into the params.
Yeah, the params hash would have a value at the key called booknum. So you would say hash booknum. That's one thing that comes in the hash. Another thing that comes in the hash I just want to alert you to is if I typed /book author equals Peter. Okay, which you can always do, and that's what you have to guard against. Anybody can type this in, and the router will parse that for you, and will give you in the params hash another one, which is called params author. Okay, so this is not enforced. This is anybody can type this in, and it's up to you when you grab the params to know what the name is and to make sense out of it. Okay. Okay, how about the sessions hash? Now the sessions hash looks a lot like the params hash, right? And you guys, some of you have used the sessions hash, right? Who's used the sessions hash in your authorization stuff? Okay, some of you have not. So those of you who have, I know, tell me what it does to the best of your understanding. So the thing about HTTP that I might have said before, but I may not have made a big point of it is, HTTP is known so-called as a stateless protocol. And what that means is that whenever an HTTP request comes to the server, unless something magic extra is done, the server does not remember anything about the preceding one. So every request comes to the server anew. Okay? And that's why in the bad old days, you had to go to a site and log in again every time you went to the site because it had no idea it was you. Because it's a new person. Oh, okay, show me this private thing. Sorry, who are you? Over and over again. Because it was stateless. It did not remember anything about the previous thing. So the idea of sessions was invented. And sessions are essentially information, because remember, when I say stateless, another way, sort of more technical way to say it is, every action that is invoked knows nothing about any other action that has been invoked. Each one is as if it's the first one ever. So sessions are a piece of data. Looks a lot like params in the way you use it, but it does something totally different. Where in action 1, let's say I have class, books, controller, and I have def, I don't know, publish, just to pick something totally random. I could say sessions author equals something. Okay? And then later on, when another action gets invoked, like def ship to customer, I could actually extract author from the session hash. And so the magic that's occurred here is that information that was available at one request to the server has been preserved in the session so that the other request to the server can grab it and do something with it. So information now goes from one action to the other, and the effect of that is that we'll find a way around the statelessness of HTTP. Okay? Questions? Yes?
Is it smart to have a session be initialized and keep going until logout associated with the user ID?
Yes, it is. And that's one of the modules of security problems that you might introduce depending on what you're putting into the session. But yes, that's the original reason why sessions were, in a way, thought up. I mean, when you go back to, when you refresh your page on Amazon, it keeps on remembering what the state of your shopping cart was. That's using sessions somehow, okay? And so the classic reason is, after I log in by supplying the correct password, the code that has verified that the password is correct puts something in the sessions so that all other actions, all other functionality of the server can know that, in fact, somebody is logged in and who it is. And then what do you think the log out functionality would do? Somebody over here. What would the log out functionality do?
It just says session symbol user to know.
Yeah. Erases the session number and that's it. Who can say, from the reading now, a little bit of what session hijacking is in this context? Yes?
I mean, I didn't really understand like the end part of it, but as far as I could tell, it was like someone would create a session and then keep it active periodically by periodically, I guess, refreshing, and then somehow when some other person signed in and created their session, they would like replace the second person's session with their own session, and then
something along those lines.
Yeah,
something along those lines. Anybody wants to say yes?
So your session is controlled.
And by the way, when I ask a question like that, I have no problem with you calling up the chapter and looking at it as you answer, okay? Because it's difficult stuff.
So the session is managed by a cookie on the computer.
Yeah.
And what session hijacking does is that it manages to get that cookie somehow, whether from like the Wi-Fi network, if it's unsecure, or through like some sort of virus on the computer, and steals that, and then when they visit that website, they use that cookie to get your section.
Exactly. What's a cookie?
I haven't clue how to explain that.
Okay. You're laughing. What's a cookie?
I mean, I don't think I can explain it well, but I'll try.
Conceptually, what does it do, whatever?
A cookie is something that is saved kind of in your browser, and the web page can access it whenever you access the web page again, so that's saved data about it.
That's exactly right. Basically, the cookie is a piece of data that the server gives the client, the browser, and the browser promises to save it locally, so that the server later on can ask for it and gets it back. And as you know, the cookies are the root of all evil as far as advertising is concerned, and why it is that when you go to Facebook, it knows you just ordered a pair of shoes from Zappos. That's how it knows. Or you were looking at shoes, but you didn't buy it. Well, Zappos left a cookie on your machine saying he's interested in shoes, and Facebook says, hey, what has he been doing? Oh, give him an ad for shoes. So basically, conceptually, all a cookie is, and think about the flow of control. The server tells the client, here's a name and here's a value, please store it for me. Later on, the server can ask the client, what do you have stored under that name? And the client returns that value. So the session hijacking bit is if I can intercept the information when this client is sending back their cookie to prove that they're logged in, and I can store that information on my computer, then when I go to the same site, it's going to look as if I am you. And I've hijacked your session because now I can go order things from your account, etc. Okay? And you guys will all be using sessions for the basic purpose of maintaining login status. But just know that a facility exists. Yes?
Well, our group is using sessions for authentication right now, and
Yep.
now I'm looking at you had before were like admin ? Whatever, and that totally just bypasses, that just goes like right through our whole like forced login thing.
Oh, interesting, okay.
Like,
how does it go? Because where are you checking the login?
like before there's like an authorized method.
Yeah, and it gets called when?
Authorized. I think it gets
And then before called
everywhere.
Yeah, so how could it bypass it? It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just like if I do like buildings / and then I type in like an ID of a building ? It just goes right through.
Interesting. Well, you have a bug. I'm sure it's not hard to fix though. Okay, that's the review. Now we're going to pop back into a little bit more conceptual stuff. Okay, so URL design is a very big deal. Okay, now remember URL, Universal Resource Locator, URI, Universal Resource Indicator, I think is the right term. Identifier. The original concept of the web, www, and of HTTP, remember there was the three major protocols that started it all, HTTPs, URLs, and HTML. The idea with URLs was that you could, it's called the World Wide Web, and those are called hyperlinks, that I could create a link between my document and another document anywhere on Earth. And that's kind of where it started, because they wanted to make scientific articles be easily indexed across different research operations. That's where it started. And so they said, okay, now how do I designate this paper that's on your server? And they said, okay, I got to do two things. I got to first indicate what server I'm talking about, and that's the part before the // And then when I get to that server, I got to indicate where on that server it lives. And in fact, it looked a lot like a directory, because that's how it started. You literally would be looking at a web server, which, by the way, originally was all coded on Next computers, which is kind of an interesting historical fact, which was the computer that Steve Jobs did before he went back to Apple the second time. But anyway, it would be brandeis.edu /home /thickey /2015 /research results .pdf. And that's how it actually started. It was just a path on the brandeis.edu server down the tree to a file. And so, in a very simple-minded way of thinking, this was a resource, research results.pdf, and this was a locator that said how to find it. Find the Brandeis server, look in its home directory, thickey subdirectory, 2015 subdirectory, boom. Yes?
What would the route for that look like?
The route for this?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to assume that each of these are variables, so none of them are fixed. And because I want to allow a variable number of slashes, I would probably say, it would be something a little bit more complicated, but I would probably just literally say route, and it would just be path, just literally path. But you'd have something additional to make sure that it would parse it correctly, and then you'd receive this string in your controller, and then it would be up to you to parse it down. And the reason you can't use this vanilla route syntax is because I don't know ahead of time how many slashes I'm going to have. So I can't say A/B/C because they may have 10 slashes. Okay? So that's a good question. So this is how it started. So there was an emulation of the fact that a Unix computer had a nested directory structure into the URLs. Time passes, not a lot of time, when they realize there's a lot more interesting things that we can do if we don't insist that every resource actually is sitting on disk and all we got to do is send it over. If in fact we said, I actually have a list in an Excel file, in a database file, and what I want to do is grab record number n and return that. So they said, okay, let's go a little bit further. Let's allow this to be much more flexible, and let's allow it to be a route, an open-ended route. So now we could say /brand.edu / whatever these are, profiles /14, and we would have a kind of a piece of code on the server that instead of looking for this file, would open the database, ask for record 14, and return that. And then it went on. They realized, well, what if I want to make some text that is actually readable on all machines? What about if I want to make it a sound file? They realized these could be all kinds of other data types. Instead of PDF, they could be JPEGs, etc. And then what about, and then HTML as being the open-ended language for a page of text with a specific fact, with a specific characteristic that URLs could be embedded in those documents. So now I could have my research report.html, which would contain a bunch of text, including other URLs. And that's how I would get a link, because if I click on this URL, it would start the game going again. All right? All right. So time marches on, and it's very interesting, by the way, the vision that Tim Berners-Lee had, because all of this is using just the get verb. But from the very beginning, there was put and post and all these things. And from the very beginning, there was an idea that it's not just a static resource that's sitting there. I may want to create something new there. I may want to modify it. I may want to delete it. Okay? But the notion of this hierarchical structure remained true. Okay. So that's a little bit of the history of how we got to where we are. So when you're building a product, the design of your URL is very important for a few reasons. First of all, whether you like it or not, users read URLs, and any additional hint you can give them about how your app works by virtue of looking at the URL is a good thing, number one. Number two, there is a way to leverage code, i.e. to not repeat yourself, like we just saw with the resources, if you actually follow certain well-established patterns. That's the second reason. A very interesting other one is that, and we didn't talk much about caching yet, but is that under certain circumstances, you could know that if I look for res_res.pdf, and a minute later you look for it on a different computer, or on the same, or I refresh the page, there's no reason to send this whole PDF over again. I can realize that I'm asking for the same resource a second time, and therefore I already have it from before, except that it changes in the meanwhile, right? Obviously, if somebody updated the file, I want to get a new one. So there's a whole world of other data that goes with an HTTP GET, which I sort of skimmed over before. One of them is a so-called time to live, TTL. TTL says the data I'm sending you back, this PDF file, you can trust that it stays the same if somebody asks for it again within, take your pick, 60 seconds. With those kinds of agreements in place, the next thing that happened was that if you look at a network inside a company or organization, you may have one server that's talking to the outside, and you have a bunch of other computers in here. And they're all running web browsers. And each of them might be asking for that same file. So what happened was these gateway computers started realizing that they could be holding a cache. So that if Kim asked for that file, and then Peter a minute later asked for the same file, it would be stored on the server locally on campus and not have to go all the way to Switzerland to get that file again. And again, that relied on the fact that that this syntax was reliable as an address to a piece of information. That's why they keep talking about resources. REST, the R in REST stands for resources. We talked about resources in the route file. The idea that a URL is meant to designate a specific resource. Okay, so we come to the idea that, and let's look at these examples I have here. Roomscheduler.com. So okay, wait, before I do that. As research marched on and technology marched on, people realized that if you could treat information that was not coming out of a file system in a regular way, then advantages with caching and other things would accrue. And so the principle became, even if you don't have a file system, to the extent that you can make your URLs look as if there's a resource hierarchy, life is better because of those reasons. And therefrom came this guy, Roy Fielding's PhD dissertation from whatever, 10 or 15 years ago, which defined this idea of REST, which stands for, who reminds me what REST stands for? Reputational something state transfer. Look it up. It's a very long, hard to understand. What is it now? Representational
state transfer.
What's the E for? RE?
It's representational state transfer.
Okay, gotcha. And basically, that went through a whole complicated analysis of if you created your URLs in a certain way, you could minimize traffic by realizing benefits of time to live, benefits of caching, and so on. So it comes to us now, if you look at it purely as a matter of convention, how do we design our URLs in a way that it's going to be compliant with REST and it's going to work well with the rest of the technology stack? So if you begin with, okay, let's do it. Let's make everything look like containers. And basically it's like book, that's why my example was /book/chapter. Everything's a container. There's a number after, or a value after the container that addresses the particular one. So which book is this? Book number 4. Within book number 4, which chapter is this? Chapter number 5. Okay? That's a nice principle. But as you probably all discovered, there's rough edges. It sort of gets confusing. For example, here's one. I have a room scheduler. And with the room scheduler, I want to be able to see what rooms are booked and which rooms are not. I want to see the list of rooms. All that's fine. I want to see who's, so list of rooms with these /rooms. That's fine. List of who's got room 3 reserved. That's easy. Okay, but what about reserving a room? So I have here a weird URL, roomscheduler.com/room/3 request. Why is that weird? Because it's not really a resource. You can't think of a request resource sitting on the server that I'm asking for. That's what you want to get to. Can you tell a story with your URL that's asking for this resource from the server? So this one is problematic. Bookstore/book/412/price. What was that, a hand? No. Bookstore/book/412/price. Why is that one problematic? Why can't I really think of that URL as addressing a resource on the web? Because, I'm going to give the answer because we have to play this game a few more rounds before you get it. Because there is no price by itself. The price is just a field, a part of the book information. Okay, but you may need it. /tourmanager.com/city/Boston. So city is Boston, that's fine. /tour/Tuesday, that already is kind of problematic because which Tuesday are we talking about? /new. Again, can I tell a story that there's a resource called new that you're asking for? No, you can't. So your starting point in designing your URLs, and we'll do a practice maybe with some of the products to see where we get, is to say, can I design a URL that that corresponds to a metaphorical model of your system of documents or resources within resources, okay? And if you can, you start there. If you can't, then you have to adapt. So here it is. I have it here on representational state transfer. Here's the paper if you care to read it. Each URI denotes a specific resource, like a page, okay, a thing. Room 3 or book 412 or Tuesday tours in Boston City. It is usually not a file, but something generated on the fly, right? There's no file in there that shows the list of tours. And as you know in your controllers, you're generating a list of tours. One of the principles, still when you ask for the same URI twice in a row, it should yield the same thing. In other words, doing a get twice should not, they call this concept, the concept of idempotence. If you ask for the same resource twice, if you do a get on the same URL, you should get the same thing back. So a get should never modify anything about the server. While I talk, do a Google for Dropbox use of post request. Do Dropbox post request. I forget exactly what the URL looks like, what the article looks like. The one that says it's a bad idea. Here, and why does it, yeah, read it. Does it Dropbox starts using post, and why is it a bad idea? Huh?
4 days ago?
Yeah, it's very, very new.
Yeah, okay.
In this class, we get last up-to-the-date stuff. This is interesting. So Dropbox just changed their protocol of their API to start using post instead of get. I'm not going to go through this whole argument. I may even assign this homework, but I just want to show you this is very, very real-world stuff. And it has real-world implications. They have very strong reasons for doing it, but there's problems that they created. Okay. And as we know very well, each URI is used as in combination with a method or a verb, get, put, post, etc. So get, so now comes in, now people ask me, how do I know if I do a get or a post? Here's sort of the orthodox way to think about it. Get, retrieve the indicated resource. Don't change it. Do 2 gets in a row, get the same thing back. Put, update value of the indicated resource. Don't create a new resource, just update it. So it was, the salary was 100, make it 200. Delete the indicated resource. Delete followed by get should return a failure, because after delete, that resource with that URL is gone, the get won't work. Post, create a new instance of the indicated resource. So post usually is used for creating a new employee, a new course, whatever else. And then there's some other less important ones which I won't go into. So let's go through each of the products, or as many as we do until we get bored, and talk about your URLs. Who wants to go? This is free consultation, so I would recommend you take advantage of this. Who wants to go first? What product? And let's talk about your URLs. Yes.
Go first. Can't
Yeah.
just GPS.
Yeah.
Go first.
Okay. What are your URLs so far? Or if you don't know that yet, tell me what what is your model?
Well, the first thing goes to a URL that's like whatever /outdoor is what we use as our main
/outdoors.
source.
Okay. Like that?
With no S. It's just outdoor.
Outdoor. Okay. Go on.
And that just has the thing. And then when you
Wait, the thing. What's the thing?
The like map and the.
So this is just by itself. Standalone. Okay. Go ahead.
And then when you search for something, it goes to outdoor / routing. It's called.
Okay, like that?
Yeah.
By itself?
Yeah.
And what does that display?
It's just the 2 points that you search and the route between them.
Where did the search so far? We've just talked about outdoor.
In outdoor, there's like 2 text fields. That's like to and from, and you type in the building.
So this is putting up a form.
Yeah.
And then you have to do something to submit it.
Yeah.
So you have another thing which is a post on /outdoor, and then the parameters.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
this is a get, which is displaying a form. Yes? And then when you hit go on the form, it's doing a post on this, which will have 2 arguments that travel with it, which would show up as params from and to.
Right.
Okay? What else do you have?
Other than that, we have a buildings list.
So that's slash buildings?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else after this?
When you click on, like, you can edit the buildings or show the buildings or delete the buildings in there.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any other.
Do you have a routes file already?
Yeah.
We should look at it and tell me.
There's nothing.
There's nothing in your route file?
It's resources, buildings.
Buildings have no sub-resources.
No.
Building has entrances. I just added this after units.
Okay, good. So you have another route?
Yes, buildings, after buildings slash entrances.
Directly or with a number first?
Oh, right, have a number.
Okay, so for whatever slash entrances, which lists a list of all the entrances for a certain building.
Yes.
What else? Anything else?
Path.
Path. Okay, where did that go? By itself?
Yes, by itself.
Okay, slash path. Anything that goes with that?
Nothing more.
Nothing more. So if I type slash paths, what do I see?
Path has a new, has a destroyed.
Okay. But can I say slash path 3?
I guess you could, yeah.
Okay. So, so from this, I see that you have a top-level resource, which has an embedded resource. Every building has a bunch of entrances, and it looks like the world of paths has nothing to do with the buildings. Is that correct? And a path has what's in the path? What is listed? When I say slash path slash 3, what do I see?
A description of a path. Also the 2 locations and smart locations.
And where are locations defined? I haven't seen any URL for locations.
We don't have locations.
Do you think you should have it? I don't know.
We should have it.
Okay. So I'm seeing what looks to me like a hierarchy that looks like buildings have many entrances. Are entrances associated with locations or not?
Yes.
One
This
to
is
one.
a kind of location.
It's a kind of location. Are there other kinds of locations?
There are locations that like parking lots.
I got you. Okay, so buildings have entrances. You have locations which stand by themselves. But an entrance can have one location, I assume. Right? And a path, how does the path go into? The path has 2 locations. Exactly 2 locations. So I have paths, which have also 2 locations. This has 1 location. Okay. So looking at this, and then, so this is it. So this outdoor thing is where things are a little bit unusual. And this is the classic search problem. This is analogous to what the articles talk about search, how do you do a search. And so, what did slash outdoor slash routing produce again?
That means building
I see. And does the routing get stored in the database at all?
No.
So if I refresh this page, it's gone? Where was it stored? Between?
So routing does not have data itself.
Okay.
It gets the data of the building, the path from the database. From the building.
Okay. And so if I and that was computed during the execution of the controller, and then never stored anywhere. So if so you got some. This is a little bit messed up, I think. This is okay, although I think it could be cleaned up a little bit. But the reason I say it's okay is because here I have a bit of hierarchy that sort of corresponds to the metaphor of the product. Paths. I got to think about whether I like your schema, but given that the schema is like that, I would suggest that. See, a path has 2 locations, so I should be able to say path /3/locations. if I wanted to see the list of locations that went with it. You may not display that in the UI, but that's how you would get it. So search is always a problem. Okay, let's say you have a contact manager with a lot of people in it, and you have add person, delete person, change person, whatever. And I say that's great. Every person is a resource. I understand that it matches the rest conceptual model that everything with the URL has to have a resource, and I know how to think about creating, deleting, and so on. But somebody says, okay, what about search? Okay, I want to search for a person, which is very much like what you have here, although yours is a little bit more complicated. So there's a few solutions to this in terms of the URL design. You can just say /search, and it will return a page with that displays the result of the search, but it's totally transient. You can say /contact /search. If perhaps you have other kinds of searches, and this would determine that the search is across the contacts. Okay. So when you have operations that can't be thought of in terms of being a resource, then that's where you see your URL design sort of breaking down and doing things a little bit outside of REST. Okay? Who feels cough if you're not at all clear what a resource is yet? Okay, I don't hear any coughs. Good. Okay, good. So when you look at your products, this is kind of the thought process you need to go through. You need to really try to find out what the containment hierarchy is in your data, but also in the user's model and the user's concept of the product, and you have to design your URLs accordingly. And once you design your URLs accordingly, the next thing you want to do, and the resource keyword in Rails, in the route file, does some of this for you, is the next step is you think about the gets and the puts. Okay, should it be a get, should it be a push, should it be a delete, or a post? And so if you follow these two rules, you're basically building what they call RESTful URLs. And from that comes RESTful APIs, which we'll come to soon, or at a different lecture, actually. So one of the earliest design questions, if not one of the very first, once you know your functionality, once you design your story list for your showcase version, is what are your URLs? What do they look like? Conceptually, they should be directory structure like, and there's a coherent syntax about them. My service discussions as topics, topic. My service discussion 2008, 1210 topic, and so on. So think of the URL family for your product as a little bit of a language, and see that it makes sense according to these principles. Okay? All right. Running a little bit behind, but that's okay. We'll continue next time. Switching gears totally. Is that a hand or just a scratch? Okay. So that's URL design, that's REST APIs, that's resources and all that stuff. Authorization versus authentication. Two very different concepts that are related. Who can say what they are, what they mean? Authorization versus authentication. Yes? I don't even know if I had it written up there, but you're looking at it very closely.
Oh, I can actually. I was trying to think of a metaphor. The shooting metaphor I can think of is authorization means can you get into the building?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, no, wait, that's. And then authentication means which doors can you access? No, that's the reverse.
No, actually, one of the clauses is correct. Anybody want to add to that? Yes. Yes.
I feel like authentication is checking if if you are the one that you identify yourself as.
Yeah.
And then authorization is checking if you have access to the resources that you want to.
Exactly. So has anybody ever been carded? Okay. If you don't have your hand up, you're lying. Okay. So you go to the restaurant and you're with your parents and you order a beer. And two things happen. They ask you to see your ID, and they look at you and say, that's her. You've just been authenticated. They believe that this is the person. Now, so that's authentication. We know who it is. Now they look at your age. They say, like, you're too young for a beer. That's authorization. Okay? Authentication is who are you? Authentication is given that we believe we know who you are, because you maybe have the password's not correct, so if you can't prove who you are, then we don't have to talk further. Authorization is like, now we know who you are, what are you allowed to do? That's it, okay? And you have to think about both of those things in your design of your product. there are some basic principles that apply for any language, any platform, anything at all, when it comes to this universe. Okay? So the first one is your product or your architecture always contains some kind of a user record, some kind of an internal representation of the user, from which you can find the elements of authorization, either directly or indirectly. You can find an email and a password or password hash. It can be pointed, but basically a user record can correspond to a user, and the user record will have what you need in order to authenticate. And obviously, that user record corresponds to some object in your world, like a user object. The second thing that's always true is that there's a globally available method that can be called that returns something like the current user. And the current user, the data type of what it returns is what? Refer to my first bullet. When I say current user and I call that method, what is it returning? Who? Say it in code.
The ID of the current user.
Maybe I would say an instance of the user object. Okay? Or something else which means no current user. Okay? So there's a method like current user that returns who is currently logged in, or if nobody's logged in. That's another thing that's always true. And then finally, once you know whether somebody's logged in or not, then there's a few other things. Whenever you do an operation, and in the most inefficient way, every operation, every action, asks who the current user is, and then figure out if whatever this action is, that current user is allowed to do it. Is the current user allowed to see the map of the campus? If there's nobody logged in, then that action says I can just let it through. If the current user is not logged in, and I'm trying to add a new path, you may prevent that. So whenever you're doing something, generally at the controller level, but not only and not necessarily, but generally at the controller action level, you check, is the current user available, and if so, is this somebody who's allowed to do this thing? Maybe if you're a student, you're allowed to see inside of buildings at Brandeis, but if you are staff, you're also allowed to see inside the tunnels. Are there tunnels? I don't know. Okay. Say what? Yes?
Is there a way to set like a field that would essentially group actions to users?
Yes, we'll get into that in a second. There's a bunch of ways to attack that. So, in fact, it's the very last thing, the very next thing. There's a few ways to go. Once I know who it is, to decide whether that person is allowed to do it. Okay? The first thing is to hard code it. Peter is allowed to change the password, and Saul is not allowed to change the password. That's very bad. The second thing is you could say, for every operation that exists, let's say change the password, there's a list of users who are allowed to do it. Still pretty inefficient. That's the beginning of what they call an access control list. For every operation, a list of people who are allowed to use it. Very standard concept. Another way is to say user capabilities. Any account, any user record has a field that has an indicator, a flag, for every individual operation. Change password, change name, change this, change the other thing. Every little one. That's another approach, user capability. That's the way I described it is not very effective, but you can just take a small step beyond that and say instead of every individual capability, you take all the capabilities, and the capability in this context is a thing that users can do that you want to control authorization on. So it could be things related to maps. This user is allowed to do, but things related to user accounts, this user is not allowed to do. So you can have two big categories of operations, and for every user you can indicate whether they are allowed to do it or not. I'm just giving you a bunch of the variations of architecture or design that are used in this context. So that's user capability. Each user has a bitmap of what they're allowed to do. And then the final, and probably the simplest and the most common case, is you have a set of categories of users. This is an admin, this is a guest, this is a student. That category is determined when the user account is created, and normally can't be changed. And whenever an operation is about to happen, like I'm about to delete a path, I say, who's the current user? Somebody's logged in, great. Does the current user have the admin, is he in the admin user type? If yes, do it. If not, give an error, and the error is like, sorry, you're not allowed to do that. That's the easiest and most conventional way of doing it. Okay? Some people just have one Boolean in every user record, which is admin or not. And whenever this operation happens, they say, current user dot admin question mark, true, delete the record, false, give an error message. Okay? That's the simplest case, and probably it'll do for you guys. But very quickly, if you're building a real product, you're going to want to refer to all these other models. Okay? 10 more minutes. Complications that have to be considered. And there's more. These are the ones that I have here. What does the product do when the user is not logged in? Right? You got to think about that, because not logged in users are also users. And so, for example, some products will say admin question mark. By the way, realize that it's a quick little geeky detail, which you would hit very quickly, but I'll save you trouble. If you say current user dot admin question mark, what might be wrong with this? Anybody? When would this throw an exception and go? Yes?
Nil.
Yeah, current user is nil. Okay? So you have to put a check before that. Another thing some designs do, which is something to consider, is they create, as part of seed data, a user called non-logged in user, which has all the characteristics of a user, including being able to respond to the admin method. And basically, the current user method returns either an actual user, or if nobody's logged in, it returns the non-logged in user. That way the rest of the code doesn't have to think about whether or not this is a nil or not. In fact, this is a general technique, a general design pattern, which they call the null object pattern, which is when, instead of returning nil for any kind of query operation, you return what is a valid instance of the query operation, but is designated as being the one that corresponds to no answer. And the advantage of that is that you don't have nils floating through your product, which avoids a lot of problems, a lot of extra checks. That's the null object pattern. But more likely, all you will do is, current. You might say if. Just keep it simple. If current user. You might have a current. I would say, current user logged in as a method. Then you would say, or then you could say and current user dot admin. Something to that effect. First the method that says you're logged in or not, and then once you know you're logged in, then it does this. Okay? All right. So that's one thing to think about. The second, yes?
Sorry, just a quick question about operator precedence and will be there.
Yeah.
You said first it does if user is logged in. Is there any difference between the two ampersands and the AND operator?
Yes, and it's very subtle, and you almost never have cause to use the AND operator. It's got a different operator precedence, and it's used in some odd cases. My advice is forget it exists and always do double ampersand. There's a word for this which is escaping me right now, for an AND which evaluates, maybe it's a lazy AND or something, which evaluates this, and only if it's true does it evaluate this. If this is false, it never tries this.
That's what it does with the ampersand?
That's what it does with the ampersand. And that's,
I think it naturally does that actually.
Pardon me?
I think it automatically does that.
Yeah, but the question is, if you did AND here, which is another option, a keyword AND, would it do that too?
Oh, okay.
But I would say, ignore that this exists, just use double ampersand. Pardon me?
Precedence doesn't really matter. There is no body in between these two checks.
The precedence matters because if the current user is nil, and you do this first, it's going to throw an exception.
No, okay.
It's very important. It's actually very, very important. Okay? So the next question is how to store the password. That's another technical design issue you have to deal with. We all know you don't store the password in plain text. That's obvious. But there's a lot of choices. First base is simply storing it with a hashed, i.e. a cryptographically scrambled version of the password. And that's the easiest, and that's probably what your code is doing right now if you have it working. But there's lots more involved things. I mean, you have to think about it, and not with your product unless it's really important to your demo. What if I want to allow logging in with Twitter? What if I want to logging in with Facebook? How do I handle that? What if I want to have two-factor authentication, where in addition to a password, I also have to respond to a text message? All these things complicate significantly what information you store with the user record to allow you to authenticate. But the bottom line in the end is that I want to be able to ask a user, prove to me that you are person ABC, and have the user do something which gives you a convincing proof that it's really user ABC. And secondly, that when the Department of Justice comes to impound your server, that they can't figure out from that what everybody's password is, or when the hackers get into it. Okay? So those are two important things. It's not, you may be surprised, but there was a time when you could call the administrator of, let's say, CompuServe or some old server and say, I forgot my password, can you tell me what it is? And they would tell you. So this is a level of, now of course nobody would even imagine asking that. But there was a time when they would store passwords in plain text and people would discover, oh, that's a security hole. But anyway, now we know better. Yes?
What is the best way to encrypt a password? Bcrypt or?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up, and it probably changes every week. So I would just, in general, here's a interesting kind of like software engineering perspective I have to that question. So the question is, what's the best way, Bcrypt or whatever? And my answer is, I would find a authentication library which I believe was really good and trust whatever they used, or I would look around. Those things change all the time. So it may be Bcrypt, it may be something else. And again, when you start thinking about scalability and performance, then you may have a consideration of how long does the authentication actually take, depending on your product design. It doesn't really apply to us here.
I think even device uses Bcrypt. Yeah, everyone. More complicated authenticators use Bcrypt as their encryptor.
I was just on like on Twitter, something was like, oh, there's, I don't know, it feels like it's like the fashions change very quickly.
Well, there was an article I think I read about Bcrypt that it's an old piece of code that has a whole bunch of old algorithms that nobody uses anymore. And actually, people aren't totally sure that it's correct. So I don't know if that's the article you saw.
Maybe, but like I just hear some whispers of it.
Yeah.
Like, that this is not in vogue anymore.
I mean, as a side bit of meta point about this thing, the world that you guys have chosen to function in, i.e. computer science and software engineering, you have just bought into a need to be constantly improving and tuning your skills. And the fact that you know Ruby or Java really well now is nice, but don't rest. Don't rest, because new languages and new platforms are coming along all the time. And if you want to stay on top of things, you have to stay on top of that stuff. You have to be looking at whatever the resources are that speak to you, whether it's blogs or Twitter or articles out of journals or whatever it is. But it changes all the time, which is the fun part of it. But I mean, I am constantly, as you can see from the links I give you guys, constantly reading about this stuff, constantly experimenting with the latest platforms. Not so much that I want to use them all, because I'm fairly circumspect before I sort of adopt a certain technology or platform as the one I like, but I have to constantly be looking at what's going on, because Rails already, I think, is it's quite up to date, but there's other things that are biting at its heels, and I would say in 5 years it's going to become legacy and there's going to be something else. So that's the world we all chose to be in, and so questions like Bcrypt, it's probably still good, but things are happening. Also, people discovered that techniques that everybody thought was perfect, 5 years ago, people discovered they're terrible. And they say, don't ever do this one again. Okay. Let's see how far I got. Okay, I'm going to just go on next time with this, okay? The last one in this section is another one that you guys might have argued about for hours. What do you use for a user ID? Is it a name, Peter Salas, or is it an email? What did you guys decide on this for your products, and why? Have you had that discussion?
Yes.
Yes, you had the discussion, and what did you conclude?
Email.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody have a different opinion?
When we implemented it, it's just usernames, but I could see the pros for email.
Yeah. What are the pros for email? Since you said you could see them, I'd like to see them too.
Well, I mean visually, and
yeah.
You can't just type in like / whatever.
Did anybody pick email? Anybody pick a username versus email as the login credential? Yeah.
I think we're gonna switch to just username.
Just username. Is there a reason?
Well, we don't really need emails unless we want to send back password recovery.
Yep. Which if the product reaches even like the third trimester of gestation, it's going to need that.
Yeah, but that's not what we're focusing on.
Yeah.
Not recovery. So
right.
We're just going to use.
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who don't like giving their emails out, so that becomes a barrier often, for sure. Okay. So I'm going to stop here, and then next time I'm going to continue on mechanics and talk about this. Okay? Any questions remaining? Let me just quickly look at what next time looked like before. So next time we're going to talk about HTML, CSS, and their friends. And the homework is form helpers and create a very simple application. I say very simple, which does this. And you should be able to use what you learned in form helpers to do this. Okay? And then we're going to talk more about authentication the second half on Tuesday. And then don't forget, let me show you one more thing. Sorry, don't go, not yet. On the following Wednesday will be this lab. And this is going to be team presentations, interim progress reports, okay? Here's what I'd like. Every team, and this doesn't have to be formal, it's content, rich, style, poor, okay? Summary of progress so far, challenges hit and challenges overcome, a demo of whatever you have running, whether it's your walking skeleton or the beginning of your actual product. Take 5 to 10 minutes. Talk in terms of challenges overcome, your stories, what the stories are, and fill in 5 to 10 minutes. We have the whole lab time to do this. And you'll have a lot of, we won't do this every week because it gets boring, but the first time through it'll be fun. So that's going to be Wednesday, the day of the lab. And that's going to be the only homework for Wednesday. Okay? Yes?
Can we also ask what people think?
Yes, of course. That's the whole idea. Yes. I mean, it's for us to see each other's work and to get advice. Okay, what do you guys think about this UI? What do you guys think about this functionality? Is it A or B? Whatever. Absolutely. Use it. I said 5 to 10 minutes because if you're clever, you'll have 10 interesting minutes. But if you run out of steam, it'll be 5. I think clever is good because you have a whole room of smart people to help you. Okay? All right. Thanks. See you Tuesday.